The great chamber of the Galactic Council stretched for nearly a mile in every direction. Its walls were made of crystal that had been grown over thousands of years, and light from distant stars filtered through in beams of gold and silver. Representatives from 12 alien species sat in their designated sections, each one dressed in the ceremonial robes of their homeworld. This was the most powerful gathering in the known galaxy. And today, they had come together to witness something that had not happened in over 300 years. They had come to watch a human die. Daniel Hawkins stood in the center of the chamber with his hands bound behind his back. He was 42 years old, with gray starting to show at his temples and lines around his eyes that came from years of smiling. He had been Earth's ambassador to the Outer Rim colonies for 6 years, and in that time he had built friendships with species that humans had never even met before. He had negotiated trade deals, resolved disputes, and worked tirelessly to show the galaxy that humanity deserved its place among the stars. Now he stood accused of crimes he did not commit. High Arbiter Velphus of the Kalari Dominion rose from his seat at the highest point of the chamber. The Kalari were tall and thin, with skin the color of pale blue ice and eyes that held no warmth. They had ruled the Galactic Council for over 2,000 years, and they did not like the way humanity had been growing in power and influence. They did not like the way other species had started, looking to the humans for leadership instead of the Kalari. So they had decided to send a message. Daniel Hawkins of Earth, Velphus said, his voice echoing through the chamber. You have been found guilty of inciting rebellion among the labor colonies of the Outer Rim. You have been found guilty of distributing weapons to insurgent groups. You have been found guilty of plotting against the peace and security of the Galactic Council. Daniel looked up at the High Arbiter with steady eyes. I am innocent of all charges, he said. The evidence against me was created by your own intelligence services. Everyone in this chamber knows the truth. A ripple of discomfort passed through some of the assembled representatives. The Velthari delegation looked away. The Morith ambassador shifted in his seat. They all knew Daniel was right, but none of them would speak up. None of them would risk the anger of the Kalari. Velphus smiled, and it was not a pleasant thing to see. The sentence is death by neural dissolution. The execution will be broadcast across all inhabited systems so that others may learn from your example. On Earth, 12,000 light-years away, Commander Lisa Grant stood in the main operations room of Unified Command Headquarters. The building was located in Geneva, surrounded by mountains that had watched over humanity for millions of years. Lisa was 38 years old, with short dark hair and the kind of calm expression that came from years of military service. She had known Daniel Hawkins personally. They had worked together during the trade negotiations with the Velthari 3 years ago. Now she watched him die on a screen that stretched across the entire wall. Admiral Henry Cole stood beside her. He was 61 years old and had commanded Earth's defense forces for the past decade. He had gray hair cut short and a face that had seen too many battles. His hands were clasped behind his back, and his jaw was tight as he watched the execution unfold. On the screen, 2 Kalari guards approached Daniel with a device that looked like a crown made of black metal. Neural dissolution was considered one of the most painful ways to die. It destroyed the brain one piece at a time, and the victim remained conscious throughout the entire process. It could take anywhere from 30 seconds to 2 minutes, depending on how the device was calibrated. Daniel did not beg. He did not cry. He looked directly into the camera, and for a moment, it seemed like he was looking at every human being who was watching. Remember this, he said. Then they put the device on his head, and he began to scream. Lisa forced herself to watch. She owed him that much. She watched as his body convulsed and his screams turned into something that barely sounded human. She watched as blood began to flow from his nose and ears. She watched as the light faded from his eyes and his body went limp. The whole thing took 93 seconds. For 3 heartbeats after it ended, no one in the operations room made a sound. No one moved. No one even breathed. The only sound was the soft hum of the computers that kept Unified Command running. Then Admiral Cole turned and walked to a secure communication terminal. His movements were slow and deliberate, like a man who had made a decision and was now simply carrying it out. He picked up the handset and entered a code that connected him directly to the President of the United Earth Government. "Sir," he said, his voice completely flat, "they've made their choice. Now we make ours." The response came immediately. Lisa could not hear the President's words, but she could see the effect they had on Admiral Cole. He nodded once and set down the handset. "Commander Grant," he said, turning to face her. "Initiate Protocol Omega. All fleet assets are to assume war footing immediately. All reserve units are to be activated. All civilian shipyards are now under military control." Lisa felt something shift inside her chest. It was not anger, exactly. It was something older and deeper. It was the feeling of a species that had been pushed too far. "Yes, sir," she said. Within the hour, the United Earth Government made a formal declaration of war against the Galactic Council and all its member species. There would be no negotiations. There would be no diplomatic solutions. There would be no turning back. President Marcus Day addressed the people of Earth in a broadcast that reached every human settlement across 3 star systems. He was a tall man with a calm voice and eyes that seemed to carry the weight of every human who had ever lived. "Today they killed one of us," he said. "They killed him slowly, and they made us watch. They wanted us to be afraid. They wanted us to remember our place. But they have made a terrible mistake. They have reminded us of who we are. We are the children of a world that tried to kill us with ice and fire and disease. We survived. We are the descendants of men and women who crossed oceans in wooden ships and walked on the surface of the moon. We endured. And now we will show the galaxy what happens when humanity stops being polite." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was like iron. "We are coming, and we will not stop until this is finished." Across the galaxy, in the great crystal chamber of the Galactic Council, High Arbiter Valthus received the news of humanity's declaration. He laughed. He actually laughed. He would not be laughing for long. For 50 years, humanity had played a careful game. When they first made contact with the Galactic Council, they were told very clearly how things worked. The Kalari were in charge. The other species followed, and any newcomers would need to earn their place through centuries of service and obedience. The humans smiled and nodded and said they understood. Then they went home and started building. Dr. Kevin Shaw had worked at the Armstrong Orbital Yards for 23 years. The facility floated in stable orbit around Earth's moon, and officially it was responsible for constructing civilian transport ships and mining equipment. Kevin was 51 years old, with thinning brown hair and glasses that he was always pushing up his nose. He looked like the kind of man who spent his days doing paperwork and attending boring meetings. In reality, he was one of the most important people in human history. 12 hours after Daniel Hawkins died, Kevin received a coded message on a device that was not supposed to exist. He read it twice, then walked to his office and locked the door. From a hidden compartment in his desk, he pulled out a small metal key and inserted it into a slot that appeared in the wall. "Protocol Prometheus," he said quietly. "Authorization Shaw 77 Delta." A soft chime sounded, and then the real Armstrong Orbital Yards came to life. Beneath the civilian facility, hidden inside hollowed-out sections of the moon itself, was the largest military shipyard in human history. It had taken 30 years to build in complete secrecy. Thousands of workers had lived their entire careers down there, never telling anyone what they were doing. Their families thought they worked in mining operations. Their friends thought they processed lunar materials for construction projects. In truth, they had been building a war fleet. Ships began emerging from hidden launch bays cut into the lunar surface. They were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The humans had studied every piece of alien technology they could get their hands on, and then they had improved it. Their engines were faster. Their weapons were stronger. Their shields were harder to break, and there were so many of them. The Council's intelligence services had estimated that humanity possessed perhaps 300 combat-capable ships. This was based on decades of observation and analysis. It was a reasonable number for a species that had only been spacefaring for a century. They were wrong by a factor of 10. On Mars, General Patricia Vance received her own set of orders. She was 45 years old, with red hair pulled back in a tight bun and the kind of posture that made other soldiers stand up straighter. She had commanded the Colonial Defense Force for 5 years, running training exercises that everyone thought were just routine preparations. They were not routine. They were rehearsals. All units, she said into her communication device. This is General Vance. Operation Homecoming is now active. I repeat, Operation Homecoming is now active. You know what to do. Across Mars and its moons, over 200,000 soldiers began moving with perfect coordination. Supply depots that had been hidden underground for decades were opened. Weapons that had been stored in sealed containers were distributed. Vehicles that had been disguised as farming equipment were converted back into their true forms within 48 hours. Mars had transformed from a peaceful colony into a military fortress. Back on Earth, similar transformations were happening everywhere. Factories that made consumer goods switched to producing ammunition and ship components. Universities that taught engineering became training centers for military technicians. Citizens who had lived their whole lives in peace began volunteering for service in numbers that overwhelmed the recruitment offices. The humans were not just ready for war. They had been waiting for it. In the Galactic Council chamber, the mood had shifted dramatically. Ambassador Zethari of the Diplomatic Corps was a Velthari, one of the species that had always tried to maintain good relations with humanity. He stood before High Arbiter Valthus with a data tablet in his trembling hands. These numbers cannot be correct, Valthus said, looking at the intelligence reports. 3,000 ships? That is impossible. Our observers have confirmed it, Zethari said. They are still counting. The number may be higher. Where did they hide all of this? Everywhere. They built facilities inside asteroids, beneath the surfaces of moons, in the deep spaces between their planets. We have been watching them for 50 years, and we missed almost everything. Valthus stared at the data for a long moment. For the first time since the execution, something like doubt crossed his features. But then he straightened his shoulders and shook his head. It does not matter, he said. Quantity means nothing against the combined forces of 12 species. The Council fleet will crush them before they can even reach our borders. Zethari wanted to argue, but he knew it would be pointless. Valthus had already made his decision. The Kelari had ruled the galaxy for too long to believe that any other species could truly challenge them. Especially not the humans, who had seemed so eager to please, so willing to follow the rules. They did not understand what they were facing. On Earth, President Marcus Day stood before the full assembly of the United Earth government. Representatives from every nation on the planet had gathered in the Great Hall, along with delegates from the lunar colonies, Mars, and the outer settlements. It was the largest gathering of human leadership in history. For 50 years, the president said, we have hidden our true strength. We smiled while they looked down on us. We nodded while they treated us like children. We did this because we hoped that one day they would accept us as equals. We hoped that war could be avoided." He paused and looked around the room at the faces of men and women who had dedicated their lives to building a better future for humanity. That hope died with Daniel Hawkins. They executed him to teach us our place. Instead, they have freed us from the burden of pretending. We no longer need to hide. We no longer need to be careful. We no longer need to hope for acceptance that will never come. He pressed a button on his podium, and a holographic display appeared above the assembly. It showed the disposition of human forces across 3 star systems. Thousands of ships, millions of soldiers, weapons platforms, supply chains. Everything that humanity had built in secret, now revealed in its full power. "This is what we are," President Day said. "This is what they forced us to become. And now they will learn what it means to wake a sleeping giant." The assembly rose to its feet. The applause lasted for nearly 10 minutes. Far away, on a small moon orbiting a gas giant in a system the Council had never bothered to survey, a final preparation was being completed. A team of human scientists had been working there for 15 years on a project so secret that even most of Earth's leadership did not know it existed. They called it the Fold. Drive. Travel between stars normally required passing through fixed gates that the Council controlled. Ships could only go where the gates allowed them to go. This gave the Council enormous power over all interstellar commerce and military movement. The Fold Drive changed everything. It allowed a ship to travel anywhere, instantly, without using the gates at all. Dr. Kevin Shaw received confirmation that the drive was ready for mass production. He smiled for the first time since watching Daniel Hawkins die. The Council had no idea what was about to happen to them. The Nexus Station was the largest military installation in the known galaxy. It hung in space at the intersection of 7 major travel routes, controlling access to nearly a third of all inhabited systems. The Council had built it over the course of 400 years, adding weapons and shields and defensive platforms until it had become something that seemed impossible to attack. Admiral Korath of the Velthari Empire had been given command of the defense fleet stationed there. He was old for his species, nearly 200 years, and he had fought in more battles than most soldiers could count. His scales had turned from bright green to dull gray, and his eyes held the weight of all the deaths he had witnessed. But he was still sharp, still dangerous, and still confident in the power he commanded. 300 warships floated around the Nexus Station like a swarm of metal insects. Each one was crewed by the finest soldiers the Council could produce. Together, they represented the combined military might of 12 species that had dominated the galaxy for thousands of years. Korath stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, and watched the stars through the main viewport. He was waiting for the humans to arrive. He expected them to come through the nearest gate, the only way any ship could reach this sector. His fleet would detect them the moment they emerged, and they would be destroyed before they could even fire a single shot. He did not know about the Fold Drive. Commander Lisa Grant sat in the captain's chair of the battleship Retribution. It was one of the newest ships in the human fleet, equipped with technology that the Council could not even imagine. Around her, the bridge crew moved with quiet efficiency, checking their instruments and preparing for the jump. "All ships report ready," her tactical officer said. His name was Christopher Bell, and he was 29 years old, with the kind of calm that came from absolute trust in his training and his commander. Lisa nodded. "Show me the target zone." A holographic display appeared in front of her, showing the Nexus Station and the Council fleet surrounding it. The image updated in real time, fed by stealth probes that had been monitoring the enemy for weeks. "We're going to fold directly into their formation," Lisa said, "inside their defensive perimeter. They'll have maybe 30 seconds before we're in weapons range." The plan was insane. No one had ever attempted a combat fold into an active battlefield. The calculations required were so complex that even the best navigators considered it theoretical. One small error and the entire fleet could emerge inside a planet or scattered across 1,000 light years. But the human navigators had been practicing for years. They knew exactly what they were doing. "Begin fold sequence," Lisa ordered. The stars outside the viewport began to twist and stretch. Colors bled into each other as space itself bent around the ship. Lisa felt a moment of complete weightlessness, as if she had stepped off a cliff and was falling in every direction at once. Then the universe snapped back into place, and they were somewhere else entirely. The Nexus station hung before them, close enough that Lisa could see the individual lights of its observation decks. Council warships filled the space around them, their running lights blinking in confusion as their sensors tried to make sense of what had just happened. "All weapons, fire at will," Lisa said. The Retribution's main batteries unleashed a storm of energy that tore through the nearest council ship like paper. Human missiles streaked across the void, their warheads designed to overload the specific shield frequencies that the council used. Laser beams cut through armor that was supposed to be impenetrable. Around her, the rest of the human fleet was doing the same thing. 47 battleships and over 200 support vessels had folded into the heart of the council formation, and they were fighting with a fury that the galaxy had never seen. On the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, Admiral Karath watched his fleet die. He had never experienced anything like this. His ships were being destroyed faster than he could issue orders. His defensive formations, planned over decades, were useless against an enemy that had appeared from nowhere. "Return fire!" he screamed. "All ships, return fire!" But his crews were panicking. The humans were everywhere, moving with coordination that should have been impossible. They seemed to know exactly where every council ship was, exactly what it was going to do next. It was like fighting ghosts. The battle lasted 11 minutes. When it was over, the Nexus station was a cloud of debris spreading slowly through space. 237 council warships had been destroyed. Another 42 had been disabled and were being boarded by human marines. Admiral Karath's flagship was drifting without power, its engines wrecked and its weapons silent. Lisa Grant opened a channel that would broadcast across all frequencies, reaching every ship in the sector and every relay station within range. "This is Commander Lisa Grant of the United Earth Fleet," she said. Her voice was steady, almost conversational. "The Nexus station has been destroyed. Admiral Karath has been captured. Your fleet no longer exists." She paused, letting the words sink in. "We are taking prisoners because that is who we are. We do not kill those who cannot fight back. But let me be very clear about something. This war did not start because we wanted it. It started because you executed a man who had done nothing wrong. You killed him slowly, and you made us watch. You thought it would break us. You were wrong." In the council chamber, High Arbiter Valis listened to the broadcast with a face that had gone pale. Around him, the representatives of 12 species sat in stunned silence. Several of them were already calculating how quickly they could surrender. "Every system you hold," Lisa continued, "every world you control, every station and outpost and colony is now within our reach. We can appear anywhere, at any time, without warning. There is no defense against us. There is no escape from us. You started this war with an execution. We will end it on our terms." While the main fleet was destroying Nexus Station, Captain Samuel Ortega was leading a very different kind of mission. He was 34 years old, quiet and thoughtful, with the kind of face that people forgot 5 minutes after meeting him. This made him perfect for his job. He commanded a team of 12 special operators, the best humanity had to offer. Their ship was small, designed for speed and stealth rather than combat. It had no name, only a number that changed every mission. Their target was the HFY homeworld itself. The Council had been holding 6 human prisoners there, kept in secret as leverage in case negotiations ever became necessary. When the war started, they had been moved to a maximum security facility in the capital city. Samuel and his team landed on the planet without being detected. They moved through the city like shadows, avoiding patrols and security systems with practiced ease. The facility where the prisoners were held was supposed to be impenetrable. They were inside within 20 minutes. The rescue itself was almost anticlimactic. The guards never knew what hit them. One moment, they were standing at their posts, and the next, they were unconscious on the floor. The human prisoners, weak and disoriented from months of captivity, were helped to their feet and guided to the extraction point. "Is it true?" one of them asked as they climbed aboard the waiting ship. "Are we really at war?" Samuel nodded. "It's true. And we're winning." They escaped the HFY homeworld before planetary defense even knew they had arrived. The first indication the HFY had that anything was wrong was when the empty cells were discovered the next morning. By then, Samuel and his team were already 3 star systems away, back at Unified Command. Admiral Henry Cole received reports from both operations. Nexus Station destroyed. All prisoners recovered. Human casualties were minimal. He allowed himself a small smile. Then he turned to his staff and said, "This is just the beginning. Prepare the next phase." The war was going to be very short. 3 months had passed since the destruction of Nexus Station, and the galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The labor colonies of the Outer Rim had been the first to fall. These were the places where the Council sent workers from conquered species, forcing them to mine resources and build ships for their masters. Humanity had long considered these colonies an injustice, but they had never been strong enough to do anything about it. Now they were. Human fleets appeared above each colony world, not to conquer, but to liberate. The workers, many of whom had been born into servitude and had never known freedom, watched in amazement as human soldiers landed and told them they were no longer slaves. Food and medicine were distributed. Communication systems were opened so families separated for generations could finally speak to each other. "Why are you doing this?" asked an old woman on the colony world of Tessara Prime. She had spent her entire life working in the processing plants, and her hands were scarred from decades of labor. The young human soldier who had helped her to the medical station smiled gently. "Because it's right," he said. "Because no one should have to live like this." Word spread quickly. The humans were not just fighting the Council. They were freeing everyone the Council had oppressed. Species that had been conquered centuries ago, their cultures nearly destroyed, suddenly had hope again. Many of them began to actively support the human war effort, providing intelligence and supplies, and even volunteers for the fighting. The Council's power, built over thousands of years, was crumbling in weak. Trade routes that had sustained the Council's economy were now controlled by Earth's Navy. Resources that had flowed to the HFY homeworld for generations were redirected to the liberated colonies. The great merchant fleets that had once carried the wealth of 100 worlds to the Council's elite sat idle in their ports, afraid to venture into space where human ships might be waiting. High Arbiter Valthus convened an emergency session of the Galactic Council. The great chamber that had once seemed so impressive now felt hollow. Nearly half the seats were empty. Some species had already sent private communications to Earth, seeking separate peace agreements. "We must consider our options," Valthus said, his voice lacking the confidence it had held 3 months ago. His pale blue skin had taken on a grayish tinge, and his eyes darted nervously around the chamber. "What options?" demanded the representative of the Morith Collective. He was a large being covered in thick brown fur, and his voice rumbled like distant thunder. Our fleets are destroyed. Our colonies are lost. The humans appear wherever they wish, and we cannot stop them. We still have resources, Velthus insisted. We can rebuild. We can develop new weapons. We can surrender, said another voice. Everyone turned to look at Ambassador Zethari. The Velthari diplomat had been silent throughout the meeting, sitting in his chair with his head bowed. Now he stood and faced the chamber with something like dignity. The humans have won, he said simply. Every day we continue to fight, more of our people die for nothing. We should end this now, while we still have something left to negotiate with. For a moment, no one spoke. The idea of surrender was almost unthinkable. The Galactic Council had never lost a war. They had never been challenged by anyone they could not eventually crush. But the humans were different. The humans had somehow become something that the Council could not defeat. The debate continued for hours, but in the end, it did not matter what the Council decided. The humans were not waiting for them to make up their minds. Admiral Henry Cole appeared before the Council chamber via holographic transmission. His image materialized in the center of the room, 10 feet tall and glowing with soft blue light. Behind him, visible through the projection, was something that made several Council members gasp. It was the body of Daniel Hawkins, Captain Samuel. Ortega's team had recovered it during their rescue mission. It had been preserved in stasis, and now it rested on a platform draped with the flag of United Earth. Daniel's face was peaceful, showing none of the agony he had suffered in his final moments. You killed this man, Admiral Cole said, his voice filling the chamber. You killed him because you wanted to send a message. You wanted humanity to know its place. You wanted us to be afraid. He stepped aside so that Daniel's face was clearly visible to everyone watching. His name was Daniel Hawkins. He was 42 years old. He had a sister named Carol and a niece named Emma. He loved old books and terrible jokes, and he believed, truly believed, that different species could learn to live together in peace. He spent 6 years of his life trying to build bridges between humanity and the galaxy. And you murdered him for it. The silence in the chamber was absolute. You thought we were weak because we chose peace. You thought we were naive because we sought friendship. You looked at our smiles and our handshakes and our diplomatic missions, and you saw a species that could be pushed around. A species that could be intimidated. A species that would accept its place at the bottom of your hierarchy. Cole's eyes swept across the assembled representatives, and there was something in them that made even the bravest look away. You were wrong. He stepped back, and the holographic image shifted to show a view of space. Thousands of human ships floated in perfect formation, their weapons armed and ready. This fleet is currently in orbit around the Kalari homeworld. Another fleet of equal size is positioned at your secondary capital. A third fleet controls your remaining shipyards. We can end this war in an hour if we choose to. We can burn every one of your cities to ash and scatter your species across the stars. Several of the Kalari representatives had gone completely pale. One of them looked like he might faint. But we are not going to do that, because that is not who we are. Dr. Maria Santos stepped into the holographic frame. She was humanity's chief negotiator, a woman of 60 with gray hair and kind eyes that had seen too much suffering. She had been born in a refugee camp and had spent her whole life working to prevent others from experiencing that kind of pain. Here are our terms, she said, her voice calm and professional. The Galactic Council will be dissolved. It no longer represents the interests of the galaxy and cannot be allowed to continue. Each member species will negotiate directly with Earth for new treaties and agreements. All human prisoners held by any Council species will be released immediately and returned home. All slave labor in the Outer Rim colonies will end permanently. And High Arbiter Valthus will stand trial for war crimes including the illegal execution of Ambassador Daniel Hawkins. The chamber erupted in chaos. Valthus rose from his seat, his face twisted with fury. "You cannot do this," he screamed. "We are the Kalari. We have ruled this galaxy for 2,000 years. You are nothing. You are insects." His words were cut off as the holographic display shifted again. Now it showed Admiral Lisa Grant's fleet, the same fleet that had destroyed Nexus Station. It was in orbit around the Kalari capital world, so close that individual buildings could be seen on the surface below. "High Arbiter Valthus," Lisa said, her voice cold and hard. "I personally watched you execute Daniel Hawkins. I watched him suffer. I heard him scream. So let me be very clear with you. The only reason your world still exists is because my orders say to give you a chance to surrender. If you refuse those orders, I will not hesitate to carry out the alternative." She paused. "You have 1 hour to decide." The Kalari delegation protested. They argued. They threatened. They tried to rally the other species to their cause. But it was no use. One by one, the other representatives began leaving the chamber, heading for their own communication centers to begin negotiating their own surrender. Within 45 minutes, High Arbiter Valthus was alone in the great crystal chamber that had once been the heart of galactic power. He looked at the empty seats around him, at the symbols of species that had followed Kalari leadership for millennia. He thought about his ancestors, who had built this empire through conquest and intimidation. He thought about how certain he had been just 3 months ago that killing one human would put the others in their place. Then he walked slowly to the communication terminal and sent his acceptance of humanity's terms. The war was over. 1 year had passed since the execution of Daniel Hawkins, and the galaxy had become a very different place. The Galactic Council no longer existed. Its great crystal chamber stood empty, preserved as a museum and a reminder of what had been. Visitors from dozens of species came to walk through its halls and look at the seat where High Arbiter Valthus had once sat in judgment over the galaxy. Many of them had lived their entire lives under Council rule. They could hardly believe it was really gone in its place. The Interstellar Assembly met in a new station that orbited a neutral world in the heart of the former Council territory. The station had been designed by a team of architects from 7 different species, and it showed. Every section reflected a different culture, a different way of seeing the universe. But all of it was connected, all of it worked together, and all of it was built on principles that humanity had demanded. Equal representation for all species, regardless of their size or power. Transparent justice, with every trial open to public observation. Absolute prohibition of execution without fair trial by an independent court. These were the foundations of the new order, and no one was allowed to violate them. High Arbiter Valthus had been the first to face the new system of justice. His trial lasted 3 weeks, with evidence presented from dozens of witnesses and thousands of documents. The prosecution proved beyond any doubt that he had ordered the fabrication of evidence against Daniel Hawkins, that he had personally chosen the method of execution for maximum suffering, and that he had intended the killing as a warning to humanity rather than a legitimate act of justice. The verdict was guilty on all charges. The sentence was life imprisonment on a human penal colony called New Redemption. It was located on a moon orbiting a gas giant in a system that had no other settlements. The prisoners there lived in comfortable quarters, received adequate food and medical care, and were treated with basic dignity. But they would never leave. They would spend the rest of their lives surrounded by the species they had tried to intimidate. Some called it mercy. Others pointed out that Valthus would live for several more centuries, and every one of those years would be spent knowing that his empire had crumbled and that the humans he had despised now controlled his fate. It was not mercy. It was something far more fitting. Commander Lisa Grant had been promoted to Admiral after the destruction of Nexus Station. She now oversaw the peacekeeping fleet that patrolled former Council space, ensuring that the transition to the new order remained stable. Her flagship had been renamed Daniel's Promise, and it served as a mobile headquarters for diplomatic missions and humanitarian operations throughout the region. She stood on the bridge of that ship now, looking out at the stars she had fought to protect. The view was peaceful, almost serene. It was hard to believe that just a year ago, this same space had been filled with the wreckage of battle. "Admiral," said Captain Christopher Bell, who had served as her tactical officer during the war and had since become her second in command. "We're receiving a communication from the Assembly. They're requesting our presence at the anniversary ceremony." Lisa nodded. "Set course, and make sure the crew has their dress uniforms ready." The anniversary ceremony was being held on Earth, in the city of Geneva, where Unified Command had watched Daniel Hawkins die. A memorial had been built on the spot where the operations center once stood. It was a simple structure, a wall of black stone engraved with Daniel's name, and the names of every human who had died in the war. At the bottom of the wall was an inscription that had been chosen by Daniel's sister, Carol. It read, "He died believing in peace. We fought to honor that belief." Millions of people gathered to watch the ceremony, both in person and through broadcasts that reached every corner of human space and beyond. Representatives from all the species that had joined the Interstellar Assembly were there, standing alongside the humans who had freed them from Council oppression. Dr. Kevin Shaw was there, the man whose secret work had made human victory possible. He had been awarded every honor that Earth could give, but he seemed uncomfortable with the attention. He preferred his laboratory, where he was already working on new technologies that would benefit everyone in the galaxy. General Patricia Vance was there, standing with the soldiers who had followed her into battle. Many of them had lost friends during the war. They came to remember those friends and to celebrate the peace that their sacrifice had made possible. Captain Samuel Ortega was there, though few people recognized him. He had returned to his quiet life after the war, teaching at a small training facility for the next generation of special operators. He did not seek recognition for what he had done. He knew that the prisoners he had rescued were alive, and that was enough for him. Dr. Maria Santos was there, the negotiator who had presented humanity's terms to the defeated Council. She had spent the past year traveling to dozens of worlds, helping new governments establish themselves and mediating disputes that threatened to turn violent. Her work was not finished, might never be finished, but she believed it was worth doing. And President Marcus Day was there, though he had retired from office 3 months earlier. He had led humanity through its greatest crisis, and now he was content to step aside and let others continue the work. His final address as president had been broadcast across human space and beyond, and its words had become famous throughout the galaxy. "We did not want this war," he had said. "We never wanted to prove what we were capable of. For 50 years, we hid our strength because we hoped that we could avoid this moment. We hoped that the galaxy would accept us as equals, that we could build a future together based on respect and cooperation rather than fear and domination." He had paused then, and his voice had carried the weight of everything that had happened. That hope died when they executed Daniel Hawkins. But from its death, something new was born. We learned that we could not wait for others to give us our place in the galaxy. We had to take it. We had to show the universe that humanity would not be bullied, would not be intimidated, would not accept injustice simply because the unjust were powerful. His eyes had seemed to look directly at every person watching, human and alien alike. Let the galaxy remember this. Humanity offers friendship freely. We want peace. We want cooperation. We want to build a future where every species can thrive. But if someone comes for one of us, they come for all of us. Our wrath, once earned, is absolute. Choose wisely. Now, 1 year later, those words had become something like a promise that humanity made to the galaxy. A promise of friendship and cooperation, but also a warning. The humans were not to be trifled with. They had proved it once. They would prove it again, if necessary. In a small house on the outskirts of Seattle, far from the ceremonies and the speeches and the crowds, Carol Hawkins tended her garden and watched the sky. She was 50 years old, with the same gray at her temples that her brother had started to show before he died. Her hands were dirty from working with the soil, and her face carried the marks of grief that would never fully heal, but there was peace in her eyes. She had watched the war unfold, and seen the galaxy transformed by her brother's death. She had received visits from admirals and presidents, all of them telling her how sorry they were and how much they honored Daniel's memory. She had accepted their condolences and their medals and their monuments, but what meant the most to her were the letters. They came from all over the galaxy, from species she had never heard of, from worlds she could not pronounce. They came from people who had been freed from slavery because humanity had chosen to fight. They came from families who had been reunited after generations of separation. They came from children who were now growing up in freedom because Daniel Hawkins had believed in peace, and because his death had awakened something in humanity that could not be stopped. One letter sat on her kitchen table, written in a language she could not read, but translated by the computer into words she could understand. It was from an old woman on a world called Tessara Prime, a former slave who had spent her entire life in labor camps. "I never knew freedom until your people came," the letter said. "I never believed it was possible. But now I watch my grandchildren play in the sunlight, and I know that they will never have to suffer as I did. I am told that your brother died so that this could happen. I want you to know that his death was not in vain. Because of him, millions of people are free. Because of him, the galaxy has changed forever. I will tell my grandchildren about him. I will tell them that once there was a human who believed that different species could live together in peace. And I will tell them that when he died, his people made sure the dream came true." Carol read the letter again, as she did every morning. Then she wiped her eyes and went back to her garden out above her. The stars shone down from a galaxy that would never be the same. Humanity had found its place among them, not as newcomers, not as supplicants, not as conquerors, despite what they had proved they could do, as equals, as builders of a new future, as the species that had turned tragedy into triumph and vengeance into justice. And somewhere in that galaxy, on a memorial wall in Geneva and in the hearts of billions who remembered, Daniel Hawkins lived on. His dream had finally come true.